Hello and welcome to episode 8 of my Kerbal Career. As usual, we are starting on the launch pad, and I have to say this probably won't continue for too much longer, as we are getting more into actual space travel. Now, this vessel is the power pharmacy that I was hinting at last time, and the reason it's called a power pharmacy you'll be seeing very shortly. Now, we just have a usual launch stage with our very signature flip of out of control ness. I don't know. Someone needs to come up with a name for that since I end up doing it every single time. I know it's just simply a flip through the atmosphere, but it needs like a signature name, and just because I can't help myself from doing it, I don't know what my problem is. It just always happens, but it never actually destroys my vessel, like I always end up making it to space anyway. Anyhow, we have that giant micro mother, or little mother. I don't remember which one it is. There's a micro one and a little one in the VAB. They're both from, I want to say, KW Rocketry. Anyhow, the unveiling of the annoying fairings. The power pharmacy, basically, a whole bunch of little blue pills, each storing a couple hundred electric charge. And this is how it gets its name. By the fact that this piece of our space station houses many, many of these little blue pills. And as for part count and efficiency, it's awful. It's actually dreadful. I think this is the highest part count thing I have launched yet. And that's because I felt like being inefficient for aesthetics rather than efficiency and not so much aesthetics. Like, I could have easily just put 8 giant blue pills on this thing, but why not a couple dozen little ones? Well, because I feel like being inefficient. Actually, I didn't even think about efficiency when I was designing it. I only thought about it about when I started feeling the lag of this stage. Now we got rid of our big engine for this little engine, which was atrociously unresponsive. And I just skipped through getting the encounter because it only took me about 25 minutes to do, with my skill in doing so, along with this vessel. Now, the engine actually took about a second delay before it understood what I was trying to tell it to do, such as burn or stop burning, throttle up, throttle down. It took about half a second to a second before it even started responding. Now, our encounter is closing with the station hub, which I have still yet to rename. And of course we just kill off our relative velocity and ditch this fuel tank because it's just causing me more pain than it needs to. And I'm just going to set it to burn back toward Kerbin so we never have to see it again. And of course control from the docking node that I want to dock, and I just start moving in closer to my station hub. Now, all of these little parts, and just this vessel in general, wasn't necessarily wobbly or unstable, but it was shaky. And I don't mean that as in, like, I try to move it in one direction and it just goes everywhere, but more so in the idea that the power pharmacy was just hard to move, hard to change direction. Well, at least until I got it to this stage with the RCS. The RCS helped tremendously, and I didn't have any problems here. Now, the reason the screen just went black was me reloading the scene because I got that strange UI flicker. And next time I get it, outside, of course, of this post-commentary, I'm going to check the log to actually try to figure out what mod is doing that, or if there's any solution that I can find. But I have not thought of it yet when it has happened. Now, this was recorded a few days ago as of the post-commentary, so the mod list changes, I want to say, 5 times throughout this episode, just because of how I was updating it and trying to fix other issues and get everything resolved. And it was not a pretty process. So what I've got here is this little tiny drone thing that I was using just as an RCS tank, which I no longer need attached to my station. So I'm just deorbiting it to avoid space clutter, because we have enough of that from the nuclear contract completer that Dudgan got stuck in orbit, and a couple other pieces around the moon. Now, before this power pharmacy launch, I did do a couple of contracts, one being the SAS-2 Werner pod, and the other being the Mark 7 payload assist module, both tested while flying over Kerbal, and it was a very simple pair of contracts for about 100 science in total. And we can see that this vessel is just deorbiting, so we don't have to deal with it anymore, and the parachute should allow us to recover everything on it. So let's move along back to the launch pad for the next launch. Here we have the beginnings of our Munar base, and I'm just checking everything to make sure it's set and making sure the light is fine. Now the full-on ambient light adjustment is actually a bit bright. I've noticed, at least sometimes it is, like when you're staring directly at the sun, but I try to just up and down it, never really at the same level, just trying to keep it visible, because when I'm playing actual Kerbal Space Program, it's perfectly visible at no bonus ambient light adjustment. And with this, I'll get back on that topic in a minute, this was the worst launch for the flipping, because I just cannot control this thing. It just wanted to go heads over heels constantly, with no hope of recovering it. Of course, I do manage to get it after 3 flips, which those 3 will take into account of the next 2 launches that we don't flip at all with. Although I believe there's only 1 additional launch this episode. And back on the topic I was just speaking of, ambient light adjustment. When I'm playing, I can see everything perfectly, whether it's dark or bright, without any additional ambient light adjustment. When I'm doing my video editing and I'm watching it, it's darker than it is when I'm playing, and then on YouTube it just becomes even darker, so I have no idea what's good yet. I'm still trying to figure out what YouTube exactly does to the video to make it so dark. Anyhow, this is the first piece that we will be landing on the moon to stay on the moon forever. It has no plans of ever returning home. And this looks very similar to the original one. It's got 4 large batteries that sit on the bottom. It has 8 large radiators from Kerbal Space Program Interstellar, and it's got 4 of the big solar panels that give us 18 electric charge per second. The Gigantor Extra Large. I'm not sure their name entirely. Now, we're just doing our burn to get to the moon as usual, except we will not be coming back with most of the vessels that we have used in the past. Now, setting an alarm for that, and trying to fix my toolbar, at least somewhat. Of course, I can't see the little knob that lets me resize it, so I just kind of go by assumption. Anyhow, as we venture forward to the moon, it's time to deploy this thing. Now, just like the space station, it has 4 arms that bend out at 90 degrees, which I set a limitation to earlier when I first got the thing into space. And of course, the solar panels, radiators, and these 4 docking ports on the side facing the camera, I suppose? Those 4 docking ports on the arms, those will be used to store 2.5 meter by 5 meter cathane tanks that I will be landing on them and basically positioning them there with the second launch, or the launch that's next up. That way, well, we can start storing lots of cathane in this thing. And of course, we'll be launching a miner next episode to start mining cathane, right after we get some rovers to check to make sure that the land is, I guess, flat enough for a base. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat, it just can't be extremely hilly and jagged. But this is the thing that we'll be landing, and it's very nice and compact. Moving on to when we actually get our encounter with the moon. You can see that I am just burning retrograde to actually get my orbit. Now, I'm not landing on this pass. Normally when I land on my initial pass, I'm not doing that this time because this needs to land in a very specific spot, and that would be on top of a Kethane node. Now, the testing I have done for landing this thing, with of course the sky crane that we'll be adding later in the episode, well, it was designed for a 60-kilometer orbit. And we've got a much more oblong, kind of ellipse-like orbit, rather than a perfect 60-kilometer circular orbit. So I'm hoping that I have enough fuel, because I barely had enough fuel to land the thing. However, I suspect that I will be using RCS to assist in my landing, since the RCS sky crane type thing that I have, that I'll be using to position the Kethane tanks on this, is, well, it can actually lift it. It has more than a 1 thrust weight ratio on the moon. So it's quite a powerful thing, and I used to use these things all the time in the past because of how just useful they are. You have basically the big RCS tank with 4 multi-directional RCS ports and 8 RCS ports that focus in the bottom direction. That way you have lots of thrust to lift up, and then you can lift up with SAS on and just pan across the surface of the moon, and you don't have to worry about anything such as having to turn your vessel and create horizontal velocity that you don't want. You can just pan around with the RCS and easily cancel it off with the J, I, K, L keys, or whichever one's H and N for like up and down and stuff. Basically the RCS control keys. Now, I don't need all these solar panels active, so I'm just going to disable a couple of them because we're not really doing anything. And that's just so that my heat starts going down, because with all 4 of them deployed, it actually was going up very slowly. Now, of course, I have enough capacity of weight heat to have that happen for probably a year without actually having to overheat this thing. But rather be safe than sorry. Now, I just completed, right here was another contract mission where I completed a few contracts for a total of over 500 science, which I will be spending right now. And what I ultimately decide for the science is the heavy command, so that I can get the copula module, which, as well as the lander can, or not the lander can, but the 2.5 meter part that's like the lander can. It's got 2.5 meter connector nodes on top and below it, and it houses 2 Kerbals. So if you have not figured it out by now, well, I just finished selecting all the science I want. This is all post-commentary, and the reason for that is I had no time where there was minimal background noise for me to play and record, or play and speak. Kind of the full on recording process, so I was just playing, recording without sound, and yeah, so now I just have to commentate on everything. Now this is the final launch of the episode, and what this is a bunch of giant wings. It looks like an actual rocket this time. Giant wing pieces to stabilize the thing, along with a large SRB to get me up into orbit. Of course, that's a procedural SRB from the whatever the mod is called. It's not procedural. No. Yeah, procedural fuel tanks, or procedural something. It is a procedural SRB from Swamp IG's mod, which he has kind of disappeared lately, sadly, because it's a really awesome mod. Anyhow, this is the thing I was talking about, the Sky Crane. Now the bottom part with the orange fuel tanks, or the orange little Rockomax engines, is the liquid fuel part of this. And on top of that is the RCS kind of sky crane type thing, surface maneuver, whatever you want to call it. I don't have a name for it. Just as I don't have a name for my signature spin, which I missed on this launch. Good thing we had 3 of them in the previous launch so that we can skip 2 launches without having to do them. Otherwise I will have to make them up. Now, I know we've been seeing a lot of rockets, and I've been playing around with space planes quite a bit. I actually was planning on using space planes to get my rovers out to the moon, which is going to be in the next couple of missions. However, there were complications. And those complications are, I have no idea how to build a space plane. Just to be flat out honest. I would build one, and then it would explode and screw up in the simulation. And I would consistently destroy the space plane. Simply because I can't make them. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Whether or not it's distributing the mass wrong or distributing the lift wrong, but I've been able to make them before, but I just can't seem to do it nowadays. Of course, I will practice that so we can start using them, because we are definitely going to need some SSTOs to bring down all of the Kethane tanks that we are going to be shipping Kethane around in. Otherwise, we'll be wasting lots of rocket parts just getting them into space and sending them back. We'll basically need a big reusable tug. Now, what I'm doing here is trying to get my encounter early, since we do need to dock this with the current, well, base hub for the moon. And I decide it's not going to happen in one simple burn. So what I do is go down to the periapsis, and I just get into a Munar orbit, so that it makes everything simpler. And then of course I play with this maneuver node, thinking that I can do everything in one go. And what's annoying about trying to do everything in one go is that when you change, basically burn prograde or retrograde, along with changing your plane, they enhance the change. Meaning if you start trying to burn down to change your plane, make your inclination negative across the plane, and then you burn retrograde, you will make it more negative than if you were just to burn down. I'm sure any of you who have messed around with maneuver nodes understand what I'm talking about. So what I decide to do is just change my plane and then go for the encounter. Because that way it's just a simple Hoffman transfer. You just go from a higher orbit to a lower orbit, or a lower orbit to a higher orbit. But in this case it is the higher orbit to lower orbit. And I don't get a perfect encounter, but I get one good enough for me to at least match my velocity, relative velocity, with the target, and just kind of start burning toward it so I can officially get my encounter. Now, one of the big things about these 2 pieces that we'll be encountering, is I need to land them in a very specific spot on the moon, which of course is, well, it is going to have to be full of Kethane. Ideally, it's going to be full of Kethane. Now, of course, I'm just burning toward my target right now. That way, or not burning toward it necessarily, but making it so that my prograde vector is toward the target. That way I can start getting very close to it and get these really nice encounters, such as 1.2 kilometers away, which is a very nice encounter, in which case I can just match relative velocity and pretty much be right on top of it. Now, in testing, I was able to, because I simulated it all as one unit, I basically loaded in the station hub, or not the station hub, the moon base hub. I just loaded it on the bottom of this sky crane and started in Munar orbit to test the thing. And like I said, I started in a 60-kilometer orbit, which is what this sky crane has been tested for, is a perfectly circular 60-kilometer orbit. Of course, we're in a higher orbit, which means we're going to need more fuel, but it shouldn't be a problem since I have plenty of RCS that I didn't need to use. And also this had a full RCS tank since they were already docked together, whereas I'm currently expending some RCS to make this vessel lighter, which means the fuel goes further when there's less mass. Anyhow, a key feature about this sky crane is, well, it has to be rotated properly, and we'll see that in a little bit. I'm just focusing on getting it docked, because once it's docked, then it's rather easy to rotate, because I can just undock, burn away a little bit, and then rotate and go back. But for now, I'm just checking everything out, slowly and closing in on the docking port to dock the two things together. And as you can see, the 4 omnidirectional RCS ports, as I was talking about earlier, and the 8 kind of bottom-faced ports. Now, Ship Manifest gave me a strange error log, and I have no idea what it means. I have no idea what it's going to do to me. So, this is me just messing around with it, trying to figure out what it is. I end up clearing it. I can't figure out how to get rid of it. So, I ultimately decide to just throw it in the corner and pretend it doesn't exist, and get on with my day. Now, as you can see, these are not aligned properly when I start looking down, because the orange fuel, the orange thrusters, 2 of them need to be looking between the arms, because the arms have to be deployed for this thing to land. And if the arms are deployed, such as they are now, and the orange fuel tank is burning right on top of it, well, I'm not going to get any thrust-to-weight ratio out of it, because the fuel is just going to be shot out of the engine and hit the station bit, or the base bit, and basically provide me absolutely nothing, except wasted fuel. So what I do is I pull this thing away slightly, and rotate it so that the orange fuel tanks are aligned more proper, or aligned so that they'll actually work. And I'm just being very precise and slow to make sure that, of course, they will work with this next docking, so I don't have to keep doing this. And once I deem that they are all good and set, then I can just attach myself to the station yet again, with, of course, the new engines being aligned. That way they'll actually work, because if they don't work, then we might have problems when trying to land this thing. So reselecting the docking nodes, making sure my RCS is working again, and redocking it. Now, right here there's one docking node attaching this RCS tank kind of sky crane thing, because I'm going to be docking that to other stuff, but this sky crane that has the orange engines is not going to be needed to use again. So it's probably just going to be left on the surface of the moon to do nothing. And these are aligned much better. As you can see, the thrusters now will go in between the 2 arms, and it will work out much more nicely so that they can actually provide us thrust when landing on the moon. So, a lot has happened in this episode. We did 3 launches. First, the pill pharmacy, connecting it to our station hub. Second, the first bit of a Munar base. And then the sky crane that's going to be dropping our Munar base onto the surface. However, we will not be doing that one yet, because we need to check out possible landing sites with another vessel that's going to be bringing rovers to the surface, so that we can see if they're smooth enough, basically flat enough for us to work with. And the rovers will also be kind of equipped as utility for the base to help out, and of course transport things around more easily. Now, aside from all of this, a very kind of quick episode with a lot in it and very unorganized on my part, simply because of it all being post-commentary and not a whole lot of real-time commentary, so just kind of talking about what I want to say, along with all the information I'm trying to get out, and just the hecticness of it being recorded over literally the past week, pretty much entirely because of how many times I have had to change the mods out. Now, originally I was planning right here to land the thing, but then I thought, what if the landing site isn't flat? Which of course drove me to build rovers, which we'll be seeing next time. Now, I haven't actually mentioned this yet, but in the next episode we'll be starting with Moho. We'll be going to Moho because the transfer window is opportune, and I designed a vessel that will hopefully get me there. I have not done any interplanetary travel, other than going to the sun, in, I want to say, since version 0.20 of Kerbal Space Program. And that is simply because I've started saves and not really had too much time to follow through with them. So this is my first trip to Moho in a very, very long time. So my vessel is either over-equipped or under-equipped to go to Moho. We will see, and of course Dudgan is going to be the test subject. So he'll either die or he won't. Anyhow, this has been episode 8 of my Kerbal career. I thank you all for watching. This is PTT GRW signing out.